We are honored today to have trainer Todd Pletcher joining us for this roundtable, and less than 2 weeks away from the Derby. So, Todd, we appreciate you taking the time. I know you have a lot on your plate. For those of you viewing that may not know Todd's accomplishments, 8-time winner of the Eclipse Award for Outstanding Trainer, 2-time Kentucky Derby winner with Super Saver and Always Dreaming, inducted to the Racing Hall of Fame in 2021, and probably your most important achievement was graduating from the racetrack industry program. So we really appreciate the time. The racetrack industry program family really comes together for things like this. So we appreciate you doing this. We also have 3 students here with us. Aldo Mateas, Eric DeCoster, and Michael Sanduli are joining us as well, and they have some questions from Todd. We're also going to be taking questions from the audience, so please add your question into the comment section, and we'll get to as many questions as we can in the time allotted. So thank you again, and Aldo, why don't you shoot with the first question?
Okay. Hi, Mr. Todd. Nice to meet you. The first question is, like, with the Kentucky Derby point system, how do you manage to have the horses peaking for the prep races to earn enough points while saving them for for the races themselves, the big ones?
Yeah, that's that's a delicate balance, and trying to peak on the first Saturday in May. Sometimes those are things you can control. Sometimes there are things you can't. We're pretty fortunate with the group that we have, or at least the top 3, that they were able to win the final major prep rounds, and that ensures them getting in. And so, not something we were really sweating too much with FORTE, as he was in pretty good shape coming in, and with Tapit Trice, we felt pretty confident that we had enough points after the Tampa Derby. So. But still, you have to also keep in mind that the Florida Derby is a very significant race on its own. It's a proven stallion making race, and so you don't want to take that lightly either. And the same goes for for Tapit Trice. Being able to win the Bluegrass secures him a Kentucky home and a breeding shed. So those races are important. But we've been pretty fortunate, I think, that all 3 of our horses, including Kings Barnes, who won the Louisiana Derby, all ran really well there, but I think kind of came out of it with room for still another move forward, hopefully.
All right, Michael.
Hello, Mr. Pletcher. It's a pleasure to see you again. Can you give us one positive and one of the greatest positives and one of the greatest negatives of all 3 of your Derby entries that are in?
Well, I think one of the main positives for all 3 of them is they like to win, and they seem to have a knack for finding the finish line first. With Kings Barnes, my one concern or potential negative could be just his lack of experience. He's only had 3 starts, although I feel like he's kind of been in different scenarios in all 3 races. And the Louisiana Derby is on the lead. He came from a little bit off the pace in his debut and took some kickback and kind of split horses at the top of the stretch. And the Tampa race was sort of an oddly run race where horse kind of ran off on the front end, and then he kind of adapted to that. So I think he's shown some versatility, but my biggest concern would just be in a 20 horse field that he doesn't have a lot of experience. The other 2, FORTE and Tapit Trice, I'm very pleased with how much seasoning they have, and how much race experience they have. My one concern would be, I think both horses want to come from a bit off the pace. So my biggest concern would be if there were not a good honest pace, or if they just found a lot of traffic they had to work their way through in a big field. So I think, but like I said, so far they've kind of found a way to get there.
Eric.
Mr. Pletcher, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us this afternoon. Both of your Derby winners, and I'd say many of your recent starters, including Tapit Trice this year, they didn't win their first start or 2, but then they became Derby contenders. So what do you expect from these types of horses in their first races, and then how do you develop them to get to the Derby?
Well, with Tapit Trice, he's one that we made his debut going a mile. We knew he wasn't a quick, 6 furlong kind of horse, but he he showed a lot of talent in the mornings. We liked the way he was training. We felt like, maybe at a mile he could get going first time out, but just kind of got away a little sluggishly, found some traffic, some kickback. It was a little bit green, as a lot of first time starters will be. And but I liked the way he finished, the way he closed. And, from that point, we were sort of, thinking about how we're going to get his maiden broke, and then sort of what the next steps from there would be. And we kind of, in all of these cases, every year you're kind of approaching it a little bit differently. Every horse is going to be a little bit different, as you can see just by the 3 horses that we have here this year. All have a little bit of different foundations and different ways of getting here. Forte's season got started early as a 2-year-old, and essentially was pretty good shape points wise coming into the year, and really good foundation of races. And King's Barnes playing catch up a little bit. Tapit Trice, we felt like we were on schedule, and it was just a matter of really getting them stretched out around 2 turns. And so every year you bring a different horse, so you can kind of learn from other horses, but you also have to keep in mind that what might have worked for one horse one year might not necessarily work for another one the following year.
Todd, how important is that 2-year-old foundation? I remember Wayne Lucas back in the day talked about that importance going into the first Saturday in May to have a really solid foundation. Does that still hold true today, or has the world kind of changed a little bit?
Oh, I think it's definitely changed. I think I think it can be an advantage. It can be in your favor, but it doesn't seem to be as vital as it once was. We've just seen that trend towards less and less races leading into the Derby, more spacing in between the final prep and the Derby, and just in general, horses are raced a little more lightly than they once were. I know last year was kind of an example for us. We had Charge It coming into the Derby, making his 4th career start, where the first year that we came to the Derby, one of our runners was more than ready, and he had won 5 races before the 1st of August of his 2-year-old year. So that's just kind of a change of the landscape of racing.
Yeah. All right, Aldo.
Okay, kind of leading on from the last couple of questions, but how early in a horse's career do you recognize that this horse might be Derby potential?
Yeah, it can depend from time to time. I found that over the years, most of your better horses let you know pretty early on in their training. And the 3 that we currently have in the Derby, Forte, back when I first saw him in March of his 2-year-old year at Ocala Stud, he was sort of a standout at that stage. He was already breezing 3 furlongs and kind of showing that he was one of the better 2-year-olds that they had on the farm there. He was one of the first ones to come into us, and by April and May we were liking what we were seeing, and not necessarily projecting a Derby horse, but we certainly felt like we had a promising colt on our hands. And with Tapit Trice and King's Barnes was an $800,000 2-year-old training sale. Worked in 20 and change, so showed big time talent at the Breeze Up show. So, he's naturally one that comes in with high expectations, as did Tapit Trice, who was a $1.3 million yearling, and beautiful colt and very good action, very good mover. So, those kind of horses you have high hopes for, whether you stamp them as Kentucky Derby hopefuls. We usually wait a little while to make that kind of assessment, but certainly in the back of your mind, even as early on as late in their 2-year-old years.
All right, just a reminder, if anybody has questions in the audience, please just type them into the comments, and we'll get as many as possible. Well, here comes one. Good timing there. Patrick Tarnay, somebody I went to school with here at the RTIP, asked, how do you manage a nationwide operation without being spread too thin? Do you limit the number of horses in your stable each year?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, we have a big staff, important assistant trainers that are kind of in charge of each division. It's not set up much differently than sort of the blueprint that Wayne Lucas laid out years ago, where you have divisions in different locations, and assistant trainer that's sort of in charge at each one, and then you're supervising. A good portion of the winter we'll pretty much consolidate at Palm Beach Downs, but during the summer months and early fall, we'll be spread out about 4 tracks, and so I'll be can only be at one track each day, but we'll try to move around between locations and watch as many of those horses breeze weekly as I can. But at the same time, communicating with your assistants on a daily basis and talking about each individual horse and what they're doing and what the game plan is. And I think that's an important way to develop horses, and also gives us an opportunity to move some horses around between locations, and maybe take advantage of a stakes opportunity at Churchill or Monmouth with a horse that's stabled at Belmont, and kind of try to move around and find the best spots for each horse.
All right, Michael.
So I just did want to loop back to a horse like Kingsbarns, who hasn't run since the Louisiana Derby, which is pushing 6 weeks come post time for Derby Day. How do you keep a horse like him in top form for that long? And also on that, with what you mentioned earlier about his versatility, have you thought about tactics in the Derby? Are you going to send him to the front? Is he going to lay off the pace? What kind of tactics is the plan?
Well, 6 weeks in between races is really not that long by today's standards, and we'll routinely run horses 6 to 8 to 10 weeks between races. So that part I'm not concerned about. He's a very fit horse. He'll have a good series of breezes in between, and had a very good 5 furlong breeze here on Friday. So I'm confident excuse me, that we'll be able to keep him sharp and fit and ready to go. As far as the tactics, I think a little too soon to say on that. We'll need to see what the entire field looks like, how the post position draws play out. I think he's a colt that has enough tactical speed that he should be able to put himself into a good spot. I don't necessarily think he wants to be on the lead. If we inherit it, sort of like we did in Louisiana, we're not going to take away what comes easily, but I'd be surprised if he were on the lead, unless there's some defections.
Are you ready to break any news on a rider quite yet? Or are you guys still trying to figure that out, and what goes into that decision?
No, I mean, the way that Kingsbarn's schedule has gone, Luis Saez rode him in his debut, and then he ran back an allowance at Tampa. So, it was on a day that Luis wasn't able to go, and then Luis had a commitment in the Louisiana Derby. So we got Flavian there, and then Flavian won the Arkansas Derby on Angel of Empire. So, I'd like to keep some consistency. It's just sort of been a matter of circumstances with him that we haven't been able to. We haven't completely locked in on a rider yet, but I'd say there's a pretty solid chance it'll end up being Jose Ortiz.
Wow. Thanks for breaking that news here on our live stream. I appreciate that. I think Eric has a question about your time here at the RTIP.
Yeah, just kind of briefly switching gears. What is one thing, maybe a lesson or a takeaway you have from the RTIP that you feel like you still apply to your business and your career all this time later, if there is one?
I think what was really good with the RTI program for me was, I grew up on the backside, and all of my experience was really, on with the horses and what kind of goes on the backside and preparing horses to run. And so I think, I got a better understanding of sort of the pari-mutuel side and the operations side of things, and from the racing office and racing departments and pari-mutuel departments and all that stuff that I hadn't really paid that much attention to prior to being there. So I thought, that part of it was good. And for me, wanted to go to college, wanted to get a degree, but also wanted to do something that I felt like applied to the horse business. And for me, it was a good fit.
All right. Thank you. Question from our audience. Do you think this successful trend you described of fewer runners before the Derby and more time between races works because there's less stress on the legs or less mental stress?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of factors, and I think over the years we've been able to identify that horses will run more consistently with a little more time in between races, and these prep races, they're demanding races, and like we talked about the Florida Derby and the Bluegrass being on their own very significant stallion making races. So when you have to put a lot into those, the 4 weeks as opposed to what used to be 10 days or 2 weeks back in the 70s or early 80s has changed a lot. And so I think as trainers have evolved, they've been able to identify that a little extra time between races is going to allow the horses to deliver those top performances more consistently. And I'm sure it's a combination of the actual stress of a race or the demands of a race, and also mentally, I think the extra time also kind of helps as well.
All right, Aldo.
And my other question would be, there might be no difference, but do you prepare differently a Derby horse compared to a non-Derby horse? Just your normal stakes horses that you run every year. Is there a difference on how you prepare them or train them each day?
No, not really, to be honest. I think that's one of the things that you kind of have to be careful of. I mean, I think that your sometimes temptation to really change things or hone in on them and maybe do a little more than what you'd normally do. I think that temptation's there a little bit, but I think you try to focus on what has worked for those horses, what's allowed them to be successful to get here, and continue to focus on that same training style.
A question from the audience: who makes the decision on whether you have an early nomination to the Derby? Is it you, or is it the ownership, or I guess some combination of both?
So usually what we'll do is before the first rounds of nominations close, we'll make a recommendation to the owners if they want to nominate. Obviously, a horse like Forte or Tapit Trice, at that point, there's no real discussion involved. It's a little bit tricky timing, I found, at the end of January. You've got some horses, that you think could have potential. You also have to keep in mind that, they might not be Derby horses. They might not even be Preakness horses, but, if they win a maiden and allowance in February and March, and all of a sudden they're running in the Peter Pan, then, they might become Belmont horses. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's kind of $200 for each race. And it used to be a lot bigger penalty if you weren't nominated, all the way back to I believe there was a time where if you were not an original nominee, which meant either the first or the second closing, then even if you decided to supplement for the Derby at what I think was $100,000 back then, if you weren't an original nominee, you had second preference, so you might not get in at all. So, I was kind of worried about falling into that situation. So generally we're pretty liberal with nominating, and I've found over the years that most of the owners, if there's any chance, let's go ahead and put up the money. And definitely you want to double check that back at the end of March when the $6,000 supplement comes up, because by then you should have a pretty clear idea if you have any chance or not.
All right, Michael.
So how much of the week of the race, and even by extension the whole trail leading up to the Derby, how much of it is preparing your horses versus scouting out the competition to see where your horse stands against the other potential entrants in the race?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of take most of our horses out during the Derby training time allotment, that 15 minutes, just because I feel like it's a little bit safer and a little less traffic out there. So naturally, you're going to see, most of the horses are going to be out there during that time, and some of the other ones you'll see at different stages of the morning. Again, that's an area I try not to get too caught up in and focus on what ours are doing. And, just because one guy's out there going in 58 and change doesn't mean that's what we're looking to do. But I enjoy watching good horses train and seeing what the competition looks like. But you also kind of have to keep in mind what you're seeing out there is maybe not exactly what it might not impress you in some ways. Those horses may be consistently trained that way, and that's what they do. And sometimes you can look too much into that.
All right, Eric.
So something I found really interesting is that you trained Forte's sire Violence, you trained King's Barn Stallion, Uncle Mo, and then even the dam sire of Tapit Trice is Dunkirk, who you also trained. So do you see any similarities between those lines, and does it help you train them in any way?
Well, I mean, just from a physical standpoint, I mean, Forte is a spitting image of Violence. He's very, very similar physical make, very good temperament, very, very straightforward professional horse to train, physically very, very similar. King's Barnes, similar to a lot of Uncle Mo's, straightforward, focused, no nonsense, just a real pro. And Tapit Trice, I think it's interesting because obviously he's a Tapit and he's gray, and I think most people's first impression is, oh, he's a Tapit, but I really see a lot of Unbridled Song in him. And Unbridled Song is a sire of Dunkirk, and Dunkirk was a really well-bred, very, very talented horse that we had. He was second to Quality Road in the Florida Derby. He was second in the Belmont Stakes. Fortunately, he had an injury in that race that ended up costing him a lot of time, and he never really got back to the races. But I think he was a big-time talent, and to me, Tapit Trice is getting a lot of Unbridled Song coming through him. He's tall, leggy, and he's got that beautiful, beautiful action. So I think it's coming from both sides, but I do see a lot of Unbridled Song in him.
Can you talk a little bit about Major Dude? We haven't touched on him yet, and how do you handle the potential of him running in the Derby versus running in one of the undercard races? Do you train any differently, not knowing where he's going to end up? How does that work from a trainer management standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, we have to treat it a little bit differently. I could probably do a little bit less with him if I knew 100% for sure he was running in American turf. But he's also a hardy enough colt that I felt like I could train on him a little bit. And, for example, if he weren't potentially running in the Kentucky Derby, we probably wouldn't have breezed him 5 furlongs last week with King's Barnes. He'd have probably went a half and been able to do a little bit less with him. But we wanted to get that good, solid work into him, and he handled that well, came out of it in good order. So, there's a little bit of adjustments, but it's really not a major factor, because he's a very fit horse. He's got plenty of career starts under his belt, and just really he's one that it's kind of in a maintenance program in between races.
All right, Eric.
Yeah. So another question I had is you obviously have a lot of horses on the Derby trail, and I'm sure it's become second nature almost to prepare these horses. But how do you determine, especially when we get to these final races 4 or 5 weeks out, who runs where? What are the factors that go into placing them?
It's generally about really about timing for each one. But with Forte being the juvenile champion, Breeders' Cup winner, we kind of wanted to identify what we felt like his best program was going to be, and we always felt like that the Fountain of Youth was the logical first start back. So we were zeroed in on that, and then Tapit Trice could have been on a similar program, but kind of talking to ownership, I said, look, Forte is planning on going in the Fountain of Youth. I really would like to keep these colts separated right now. And so it kind of worked out well timing wise that he was able to go to the Tampa Derby, and then that put us on target to put both colts into a grade 1 final prep. And it's especially important for Tapit Trice, who had not won a grade 1 up to that.
All right. Well, Todd, we can't thank you enough for doing this. I don't want to take too much of your time. We know how busy you are, with less than 2 weeks to the Derby. So we try to limit this to a half an hour, and I think we're pretty close to doing that now. So thanks to you, thanks to all of the students. we have some photos back in the day of you here. Some. So we'll run through some of those photos on the way out, and we're also going to try to show the FORTE race in the Breeders' Club. Well, this is a more recent photo here, but we have some older photos of you. That's a smaller photo there of you and Lucas and the team. So yeah, so we have some cool photos here, just going through a little bit of a walk down memory lane.
Yeah, good times there. Enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, well, thank you again, and we'll watch FORTE on the way out here, winning the juvenile. So thanks again, and take care and good luck on the first
Thank
Saturday.
you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cave Rock cuts the corner. FORTE on the outside. National Treasure between them. Verifying is next. Cave Rock is taken on here by FORTE. The two of them coming down to the wire. FORTE on the outside. Cave Rock along the rail. And FORTE